Salam, Zak.
Alaikum salam.
How are you doing, man?
Very good. How about you?
I'm doing great, man. I'm excited, to be honest. I mean, for me personally, like one of the advantages of just being here in the US is getting to meet such unique personalities like yourself, and I'm excited to go into it tonight, man. And what was the major that you chose as well?
So it was politics, philosophy, economics, and law. It was a combined major, and then also I did Arabic.
Wait, you said politics? Can you go over that again?
Yeah, so it's a interdisciplinary major. So it involves politics, philosophy, economics,
so
and law.
basically kind of like 4 majors.
Well, I wouldn't say it wasn't not the work of 4 majors, but it was especially focused on economics, and that's probably my topic I'm most interested in. I thought about doing an economics major, but then I ultimately decided that wasn't the route I wanted to go, just because I didn't really want to go into economics graduate work ultimately. So that's why I ultimately didn't go into. But I love economics as a subject. I think it's really interesting.
You talked about our friend Suleiman. No, this wouldn't have happened without him. Tell me, how did you meet him?
So basically, my freshman year, I was like, dang, I want to meet some Muslim students. Yeah. So I joined the Muslim Students Association at the local mosque. And then it was literally, well, not chance, I guess it's the qadr. I just went in there and sat randomly next to Suleiman. And then we started talking, and then other people came over, and then that was... the rest is history there. So
exchange contacts, started going out from there.
Yeah, I think we went like to dinner or something after the meeting.
Yeah.
And so it was very fortunate, mashallah.
Yeah, to be honest, he spoke a lot about you. That when he like said that you're okay with having a podcast, I was super excited, because especially like with a person of your upbringing and your background, like it's very interesting. And now, going into your journey to Islam, you grew up in a household of different religions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Your father was Jewish and your mother was Christian.
Yes.
How was that like?
So,
like, would you celebrate Hanukkah one day and then Christmas the other?
Yeah, we would. But they were neither one of them were very religious. My mother definitely believes in God, but has since I remember. Her family was Catholic, and my grandmother actually used to be a nun. She left the convent, obviously. That's why I exist. But yeah, so they were Catholic, and then my father's family was Jewish. But my father really was not religious at all. And we celebrated Passover and Hanukkah, that sort of thing. But we didn't, or actually, I went to Sunday school a little bit at the synagogue as a kid. But it was very minimal religious upbringing. It was just the holidays for both Christianity and Judaism.
Okay, so it was mostly the holidays for which you...
Yeah, that was really the only way it impacted life. Like, we weren't doing daily prayers.
Okay, so it wasn't integrated into your daily lives. What about like Sunday church maybe? Or
No.
Nothing.
We didn't go to any church. The only thing is, briefly, when I was like, I don't even remember, I went to Sunday school at the synagogue, and they would teach you a little bit of Hebrew or whatever. Mm-hmm. But even in that case, it's kind of funny. My dad wasn't even the one who wanted that, because he's not religious at all. It was my mom who was like, they need to learn a little bit about their heritage, so they should go at least learn something. So it's actually my Christian mom who sent us to the synagogue a little bit, not even from a religious perspective, but just from that's like your culture, And
what were some things that you learned just like from being there?
Well, actually, one thing I have a very vivid memory. The first time that I had heard about the Quran was from the rabbi there. And he was saying how in the Torah, it's in the Bible, obviously in the Christian tradition, and then it's also a kind of brother to the Quran. The Quran considers the Torah like a kind of another religious scripture, and so that was the first almost time I remember hearing of the Quran or this sort of thing was from him actually.
And just going back into like your upbringing, how did being in a household of both Jewish and Christian upbringing or religions, how did that influence your own beliefs?
It's hard to say, obviously, because, it's hard to say how anything influences what you really believe. I have no doubt that it probably influenced ultimately my decision to convert to Islam, because if you're raised in a Christian household, there's a sense in which you're raised in a household in which there's Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also there's a very strict monotheistic perspective. in contrast to the Trinitarian doctrine of Christianity, which, you know, I was never really exposed to. But certainly my mother believed in the messianic status of Jesus, and my grandmother was Catholic, like I mentioned. So I had some minimal understanding of that. So if you have Jesus and but you don't have the Trinity, you know, Islam is kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So, but of course, I didn't. Islam wasn't my. You know, I studied many different religions. That wasn't the only reason ultimately, but I'm sure it had an influence.
You said that the Trinity, basically, you weren't taught that in a sense?
No, because like I said, my mom wasn't very religious, so we didn't really have any strict like Christian upbringing. I knew what it was, but it wasn't like it was something that was fervently believed in the house. There's belief in God, and then on my mom's side, Jesus.
Uh-huh.
And actually, even my dad, he wasn't really. Now he believes in God, alhamdulillah. But before he didn't. He was not. He was almost, you know, agnostic, or, you know.
Jesus being part of a Trinity, was that something that you assumed? Okay, because like your mother wasn't that religious and maybe didn't teach you that at a young age, but in the general concept of Jesus and Christianity, the Trinity, according to them, is a basic teaching.
Mm.
Did you not assume that?
No, I wouldn't. No, I knew what it was, the Trinity.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like there was ever a time where I would have, if you asked me, do I believe in the Trinity? I wouldn't have said that. No, I would have just believed in God. And then I don't know, even, I mean, obviously when you're a young kid, it's hard to recount what you actually believe, but I had an understanding of Jesus and who he was, minimally from my mother's side, but going into any actual strict doctrines of Catholicism or any other Christian denominations, that really came later when I started studying religions and I came to understand, okay, this denomination believes this.
At what age did you start researching about religion?
Maybe when I was probably like 10 or 11, I started studying a little bit. But then what really got me going was I had lived in New Zealand for a year when I was 12, and I had a close friend there who was from Pakistan, and he was Muslim, and that kind of just got me thinking about religion in general. And we also, our friend group was kind of funny. Like we had a close friend of ours who was Buddhist, who was from Sri Lanka. Like we had a kind of diverse situation going on. Yeah. So then I was like, okay, I'll study all these religions, and then obviously, eventually, Islam was the one that I settled on.
You said you started researching about religion at the age of 10 or 11.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah. Because even before that, even since I was a little kid in elementary school, I loved any kind of mythology or, you know, like Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology and all that stuff. And that kind of bled into, after researching that for a while, getting into religion. But I mean, I don't remember a lot of the things I used to be able to tell you about Greek mythology and all those things.
Yeah,
but when I was a kid, I had like a obsession with... I just like religion is just fascinating in general as a subject.
People nowadays who are 10 or 11 are obsessing over Messi and Ronaldo, yet you were researching about Islam and
well, I was always a very nerdy kid, you know. I didn't really watch sports. That was my brother was all into sports. He plays hockey, but I was just, you know, reading. In fact, I'd be at like my brother's hockey games and I'd be reading books.
Reading books?
Which is kind of disrespectful to
my
brother.
Was that what you would say your access to information was reading books, or was it through the internet or what basically?
I would say like for my early life, it was definitely books. I was reading all the time. Mm-hmm. And in the car, I was reading, like I said, sorry, Jared, at his hockey games, I'd be reading, you know, that was my favorite thing to do. Nowadays, you know, obviously I do a lot of research online and stuff, but when I was younger, it was books. And so when I got back from New Zealand, I was like, I'm just going to read all the holy books. So I read like the Bhagavad Gita and the New Testament and the Quran, and not in the original language, of course, but.
What did you think of like the other religions outside of the three major ones?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of respect for there's beautiful things and traditions in most religions, I think, and I love the Bhagavad Gita. It's a Hindu text, has some really beautiful things in it. But and I mean, it's hard to say. You know, you like to think that it was, you know, you had a rational basis for this. Again, though, I obviously came from an Abrahamic background, so that also influences things. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, you know, I thought there's some good arguments for the God of Abraham. And Islam, I think, made the most sense as an expression of the tradition of Abraham.
And just kind of like comparing and contrasting the three major religions to some of the other religions that you researched, were there any similarities between the teachings of both?
Yeah, I think there's a common theme in a lot of religions when it comes to, compassion or for other human beings. Although I will say that I think one beautiful and unique thing about the Abrahamic religious tradition is its emphasis on the equality of human beings. In a lot of, obviously there's different denominations in Hinduism. I don't want to overgeneralize, but you have this idea of the caste system. So different people are made in a hierarchical way. Some people, they're Brahmins, some people are different castes. That's how they were created. They were created unequal in a sense. Whereas, in the Declaration of Independence or whatever, we have this statement that all men were created equal. And that's an Abrahamic religious idea at the root of it.
Mm-hmm.
You get that from the Bible and also reiterated in the Quran, this idea that God created all human beings equal. What their merit is in their character, not their background from tribe or caste or etc.
Mm-hmm. And now I kind of want the specific story of how you came to Islam. What were the unique set of circumstances, in a sense, that led you towards Islam? Yes, of course, you had some Muslim friends that kind of piqued your curiosity in a sense, but what was like the circumstances in general that pushed you towards it?
So I think it's definitely the fact that from doing a lot of research and reading, and this is a continual process, I'm still reading, still researching, but at the time I was very much convinced of the messianic status of Jesus, but I also thought that, these doctrines that assigned him divinity were false. So if you have a position where you think, look, Jesus is the Messiah, he's the fulfillment of what Judaism promised, but he's not God, like as the Christians would think.
Yeah.
Well, then you either have Unitarian Christianity or you have Islam, and I think Islam makes more sense for a number of different reasons, but one of them just being that I don't know how in depth you want to go into
ahead.
This, but it's like in the early history of Christianity, there's still a battle going on between different perspectives. You have the Arians, for example, who are a bit more Unitarian. They still assign Jesus a pseudo angelic status, but he's not God. And then those other sects they're persecuted out of existence, or for various different reasons. They disappear, and the Trinitarian doctrine is ascendant in the Christian world after the Council of Nicaea and everything. And then Islam comes on the scene, at exactly the perfect time, right after that period in which any last glimmerings of Unitarianism has kind of gone underground. So if you're thinking that if you're Unitarian Christian, it's this weird situation where you have to think that, Jesus is not God, but for over 1,000 years, people all over the world were just wrong about this, and God didn't do anything to rectify the situation. Whereas Islam comes in neatly, because it's just as that idea is lost and Trinitarianism is ascendant, Islam comes into the picture. It's like, of course, God would send a prophet to make sure that the true doctrine wasn't lost.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one important reason, I think, that persuaded me of Islam. And also, I just think the Quran was beautiful. The first time I read it, I loved it. There's just so many things, especially like La ikraha fi din,
Yeah.
as a beautiful verse, like nothing you see in any other religions. So, and obviously also, like I mentioned, the verse about that is in the Talmud. Whoever saves a life, it's as if they saved all mankind. But I think the statement in the Quran is more universal than the statement in the Talmud, at least the Babylonian one.
Yeah, from what I understand about the Christian history is that, if I'm not mistaken, it was, I don't want to say anything that I'm not exactly sure of, but there was a gap of 300 years between when the prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, died, and then when the Trinity was introduced as a basic and natural concept of the Bible that needs to be believed in. And if you don't believe in it, then you're not a Christian.
Right.
To what extent is that accurate?
I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, obviously, this is a controversial, people debate this, but I think that you look through the early period of Christianity and you see a clear development in which Jesus, his status is elevated and elevated until he ends up being God. And you also have to think, there's a very clearly Neoplatonic influence on the Trinitarian idea. So there's a Greek philosopher who is sort of like working in the tradition of Plato, and he, the founder of Neoplatonic tradition. I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. I'm not very good with Greek, but Plotinus, I think, is how you pronounce his name. But he basically argued there's like the one, the demiurge, and the world spirit, and these were all essential to the creation of the world and everything. And it's very clearly in a way the Trinity, or the background of the Trinity. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the early Christian theologians, they were trying to integrate into an Abrahamic religion Greek philosophical ideas, which weren't really in Jesus's message, mm-hmm. but were popular in the Roman world because Christianity is spreading through Rome, and then those sorts of things get integrated in there. And so the one becomes the Father, the demiurge is the Son, the world spirit is the Holy Spirit, etc.
Yeah, from like my own research into this topic, one of the reasons why I guess the Trinity came into existence was because of the Roman Empire, was because of the various different gods that they believed in, that they felt it was in a sense similar to their own beliefs, believing that Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and the Father were all one in that sense. But using your own rationale, how did you come to the conclusion that Jesus was not a god and in fact was a prophet? Because like there are many videos out there on YouTube and there are many pastors as well that cite specific verses that would indicate that Jesus was God. And how did you use your own rationale to come to the conclusion that he wasn't?
So so again, obviously contested topic, but I think that there's a really strong case to be made that the New Testament ultimately is not making a Trinitarian any Trinitarian claims. I mean, first of all, the Trinity, the actual Trinity, the idea of it is never articulated. There's one verse where the Trinity was interpolated into the text, but we know now that was not in the earliest Greek manuscripts. Mm-hmm. And then if anyone's interested actually in exploring this topic further, I really recommend the work of this guy, Bill Schlegel. He's a Unitarian Christian, but he goes really in depth into the subject of the New Testament and the case that the New Testament's message is ultimately Unitarian. I mean, because I don't have like we could get like the New Testament out and start looking at specific verses that they cite. But one thing that Jesus says in the Gospel of John is he's praying to God the Father, and he says, Father, and then he's giving a prayer, and then he says, this is eternal life, that they believe in you, that's the Father, the one true God, and in Jesus, whom you sent. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a clear differentiation made consistently between Jesus and God. Yeah. And some of those verses that they try and construe as saying Jesus or God, I think can be interpreted in other ways. But I don't know if we have the resources to go too deep in that, but Bill Schlegel, I recommend if anyone's interested.
So, you said that you became interested initially because of the people that you surrounded yourself with. You had a diverse group of friends. Mm-hmm. What were the sources that you used? Was it just the Quran when it came to learning about Islam, or were there specific scholars or sheikhs that you looked up on YouTube or something like that?
Yeah, so I also read some of the books by Hussein Nasser, who's at Georgetown. He has a translation, he worked with other people for a translation of the Quran. Also, another book I really liked was Misquoting Muhammad by Jonathan Brown. I don't know if you know him, but he's also a convert to Islam. That's a good book that's really a book about the Sunni canon. Those are the ones that stand out most in what I remember, and then also just plenty of research online and reading certain different things. The first translation of the Quran I read, unfortunately, was the Ahmed Ali translation, which I don't know if you've heard of that one, but it's a very like revisionist. He tries to translate away miracles, things like that. Yeah. Which is kind of a shame. It wasn't until later that I actually was like, oh, this is a translation that's a more accurate rendering of the text. So that's, I mean, obviously, as I think most people know, like finding a good translation of the Quran is a difficult, it's a difficult thing. You really have to learn Arabic, there's no other way to really get the, it's
just
like, that's why I started learning Arabic. I was like, I can't trust any of these people. They're always lying. So.
No, that's a fair judgment to make. Being Muslim in a student environment like the University of Arizona, how was that like?
Well, fortunately, I had, Suleiman, I had friends who, and also even my friends who were not Muslim, they were pretty, they weren't like super crazy alcohol, people. Yeah. When I was in high school, I did drink but I think that once I became like really convinced of Islam, I don't know, it became easy to not drink, especially I think once I left the friend group that I had in high school, because always you're with those people. It's like, that's what they do for fun. Once you leave that group, then it's, I think personally, I haven't felt that it was that bad of a temptation.
Generally speaking, quitting alcohol is kind of associated with self-improvement. How would you say like your family and your friends reacted to you becoming Muslim and quitting possibly like these bad habits?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to have a family and also friends who were pretty understanding. Obviously, there's a certain number of people who were your friends because they wanted to be invited to the parties you were throwing or whatever. And then once you start drinking, suddenly those people disappear. But most of my core friends were not like that. I still would hang out with them and everything. And I would just drive them home or whatever, I'd be the driver. But thankfully, my family was very supportive and I'm lucky with that.
Supported you and accepted the decision that you made.
Yeah.
Did you try to teach them anything?
Yeah. Well, certainly I've had lots of conversations about them with Islam, and we've talked about this a little bit before. But like I said, my father, he was pretty agnostic. I think I've gotten him to really believe in God. So like I was saying, I got La ilaha illallah, I'm still working on Muhammad Rasulullah. But yeah, it's like, it's hard. I think Islam is hard for Western people, not because Islam is hard as a religion, but because just even simple things like wudu.
Yeah.
Okay. It's hard for Western people to understand, I have to like wash myself before I pray. Like, whereas once you start doing it, I love the rituals of the prayer and everything. And it makes sense. Like, why would you not want to make sure you were clean and presentable in front of God,
Yeah.
But I think like Western people, they have a kind of immediate, what would you say, difficulty with ritual, ritual, I think, or why, okay, I have to pray this way. I think that's a huge stumbling block for Westerners to convert to Islam, unfortunately.
You said something quite interesting, which was when you accepted Islam and quit the bad habits, a portion of your friends no longer were your friends. So how did your friends that were Muslim from university that you got to meet at the Muslim Student Association, did they bring you closer to Islam and that type of stuff?
Yeah, I think definitely, just in the sense that when you're with other Muslims, it's easier to pray. It's easier to do all kinds of things, And you also, I think there's studies on this. When you're in a group of people with a shared belief, it definitely, ensconces that belief. Even if they don't even like deliberately are trying to, teach you anything in particular, just by being with them and being like, okay, hey guys, it's time to pray, and then pray. Like that's, if you're not with Muslim people, then that's not what's happening. And then prayer is like a burden rather than something that, that's just what we do,
Yeah.
So it definitely makes that easier. I'd say, and that's another thing I think that's a big burden to people in the West for Islam is prayer, because they just, I have to pray. It's like, it doesn't take that long, but they think of it as like this incredible hardship,
Yeah, it's just like something that would take you 5-10 minutes. To them, it's like,
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And Ramadan. But I think but what I always tell non-Muslims is like Muslims, well, I'm sure there's some exceptions, but like Ramadan is a time that a lot of people look forward to. I always love the month.
I'd agree.
And it's usually everything. I mean, it could always be placebo, but obviously believe in Islam. So I think it's not just that. I think there's a barakah in the month, and everything feels easier. It's easier to pray. It's easier to avoid
What was it like, your first Ramadan?
Well, unfortunately, my first one was basically just myself. It was the summer between my junior and senior years of high school, and I was just fasting by myself, basically, which was fine, But I had a much greater enjoyment of successive Ramadans when I was with my friends in college and everything, when we could actually. But even then, the first few years, the summer was when it was, so I wasn't even in school. But yeah. So, I even just the fasting, I obviously it's nice to gather with people, but there's also something kind of religious, or I guess, about being the one fasting person around.
Yeah.
Like everyone else is eating and you're like,
you're going this
a
challenge.
Yeah, it's a fitna. Like, okay, I have to actually be Muslim, like testify to Islam in this context.
How was it like going through Ramadan and having classes as well? Because I know for me personally, I have 8 a.m. classes. So that could be very difficult at times, finding the courage to get out of bed. So how is that for you?
Well, I think, it's obviously difficult, although I do think that, it's good because then you're experiencing the full fast. It's probably not the best to just sleep through so much of the fast, So in a sense, like it's frustrating, but it forces you to actually be throughout the day awake,
Were the majority of the people in your friend group Muslim as well, like at uni, or?
I would say I kind of had two friend groups. I had the friend group that was Muslim, like Suleiman and Sultan, and then also I had a group of friends who were like from my Arabic class, but they weren't Muslim. And so that was pretty much but even they, because they had, because they were studying Arabic and everything, they had a pretty good understanding of Islam. Oh, I guess I had some good friends who were from my PBEL major, and they were much more religious Christians, but they were very interested in religion generally. So we had a lot of good conversations about Christianity versus Islam and everything. So it was good.
I get the sense you kind of tend to you like more deeper conversations than the basic ones that, oh, how was your day? No, you kind of like to go a bit deeper. What were the challenges, you'd say, of just like being Muslim when you first became a Muslim? Because you became a Muslim at 17 years old. Yeah,
16 or 17 is the spring of my junior year, so I can't remember if I had turned 17 yet. I think I had. My birthday is in April, so it was like around this time. So yeah, I'd say the challenge. I mean, I guess the challenges would be maybe when I was working, like I had a job at a shoe store. And then it's just awkward to be like, hey, you're working at the shoe store, and you have to tell the manager who you have no idea what they're going to think of Islam or whatever. Like, can I take a break to pray? Like, it's just that's why. So I just recently was in Jordan, and it's so nice because you could be literally anywhere and there'll be a place to pray. Right? You say like, hey, I need to pray, and then they'll be, oh, right here. Right. But whereas, obviously it's like you're talking to your manager, like, so I'm Muslim and I have to pray. Like, can I take it's kind of it's kind of awkward.
You became Muslim in your junior year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
How much did that shift your perspective in a sense?
I think it not then, not immediately, but over time, I think it really had a profound impact, especially because if you tie yourself to a religious tradition that is, the thing is that I think for a lot of people, and I was this way too, morality is whatever you want it to be. You sort of just like think, okay, what I want, and then you try and think of ways to make it, good in your own eyes.
Yeah.
But if you tie yourself to a religious tradition, and especially one from a different culture than your own, a time period much before your own, it forces you to struggle with some difficult issues where, your upbringing and understanding of this is dissonant with the text. And I think that that's a good thing for everybody to go through, even whatever the ultimate outcome of it is, because it helps you recognize that just because X is considered good in today's age does not mean it's good, and that there's other ways to understand what is moral and good, different cultures, different time periods. And getting involved in a religious tradition forces you to confront that. I think especially a religious tradition like Islam, because in Christianity, there's so many Christian denominations where they just, they'll whatever their gospel is literally just the modern day morality, right? They'll shift with the times. And I think Islam doesn't do that as much. I think they really, as a religion, it really tries to stick to the Quran. Obviously, there's conservative Christians. That I don't mean to say that's Christianity in general, but like there's so many churches that they just go with whatever is fashionable. You
said something just now, which is something that is right in this day and age doesn't mean that it is actually right. What was something that you went through your whole life thinking that it was okay, that it was fine, but Islam came and taught you otherwise?
I would say two things. The main two things would be alcohol and also like sex before marriage. Obviously you just take that for granted growing up in an American context. It's just like normal,
Yeah.
And then thinking about Islam and the arguments against it, those things really persuaded me. And there's a lot to that, but it's ultimately like that is my culture, American culture. And I think it's unhealthy. I think it's a shame. And it's certainly destroyed, in my opinion, the family and the institution of the family, which is a loss because the family is crucial to any functioning society.
Absolutely. Having conversations with your friends from uni, especially unis where like alcohol and premarital sex is extremely common.
It is what you do for fun.
Yeah, it is the
recreational
norm.
activity.
It is the norm. So having conversations with them about that specific topic in this environment, what was that like? What was their reaction?
I think, well, I try to be pretty diplomatic. Like if I'm making an argument about this,
yeah.
And I found, it's so funny. I've had conversation with friends that go back to high school. I'm catching up with them, and sometimes it'll even be like they'll say, "You know what, man? Like, your argument it makes sense. Like, alcohol clearly is bad, but I'm still gonna drink it." It's like, well, there's nothing you can do at that point. If they're like, "You're right, it's bad, but I'm gonna keep drinking it," you have to give up then, I think, because that's just until they have to recognize that, like, no, actually, the pursuit of what's good is the purpose of life. So, and that's why I think, unfortunately, rational argument can only go so far. You can show them all the studies about how alcohol is bad. You can show them that actually there's an article just recently from the New York Times talking about how those studies that said there's moderate drinking has health benefits is actually false, because what the sample they used include for people who weren't drinking included people who had previously drank a lot but then stopped drinking. So of course that's going to distort the statistics, because it's like, well, those people, they were binge drinking and now they're not drinking. So now you're counting them in the group of people who don't drink. Well, that's going to skew things. So once they adjust for that, then it becomes clear that the moderate drinking benefits evaporate. But you can show them all that stuff. And if there's not I don't know what it is, maybe, like guidance, I don't know, maybe a supernatural guidance, or there's not a commitment to, hey, I actually want to be the best person I could be, then it's doesn't do anything, They can say it's true and then they just ignore it.
Yeah, having these two friend groups, basically, where they know that something is, as you explained to them, wrong, but they continue doing it, and then having a friend group that it consists of Muslim friends, was it uplifting in a sense, or comforting, knowing that there are people and the friends that you have that are closer to you when it comes to values, beliefs, actions, and that type of stuff?
Definitely, absolutely. I mean, is crucial. Otherwise, you feel, alone in the. But so yeah, I think it's hard to commit to anything if you're the only one doing it. So having Muslim friends or people around you who have the same views is necessary.
I'm assuming that you becoming Muslim obviously pushed you towards wanting to learn Arabic. So what were the steps that you took in order to learn Arabic? Did you take classes in uni? Did you? Yeah,
exactly. So I took classes in school, studying Arabic at the university, and then, practicing a little bit with friends who spoke Arabic, listening to Arabic music. I like Fairuz a lot. It's really good, especially in the morning. No, actually, I don't.
Having your coffee.
Yeah. No, I listen to her all day. I know that's not the way, but and then and then also I went to Jordan this last summer to continue. But I mean, I've been really bad this past year since I got back with practicing. I need to get back into the habit of practicing, but it's hard. If you're not around people who speak Arabic, it's
all
hard
the time. It's gonna
hard
be hard
practice
to pick up the language and become fluent.
That's why,
in it.
it's hopefully like, I think that's almost, if you want to learn a language, I think, John McWhorter, he's a linguist, but he's kind of famous guy, but he there's a quote where he says, if you want to learn another language, you have to either move to the country where they speak that language, or you have to marry someone who speaks the language, because that will force you to speak it all the time. Like,
and the friends that you made in your Arabic classes, were they all Americans, or like was it a diverse group? Did you happen to meet Arabs who just wanted easy credits and took an Arabic class?
There were some of those. There's definitely some, especially Kuwaitis. I don't know why. I don't know. They were coming in there and just like coasting through.
Getting that.
But that's. I'm glad they were there, because then you can ask them questions, right? Like, what does this mean? And then they can help you with the homework, whatever. But yeah, I would say mostly it was Americans, and I guess it's kind of funny. There's it's either Americans who want to join the military and they're learning Arab, or like diplomacy, that kind of thing, or it's like Americans who are interested in either because they're Muslim or they're just interested in Islam, that kind of academic side, right? It's like they're interested in the Arab world, or in Islamic culture and everything like that.
Yeah, especially for a person that is trying to learn Arabic, it is very hard getting over the like different dialects. There's so many different dialects. Did you face any problems regarding that?
Yeah, well, that's definitely, I think that's the hardest thing, I think, because you spend all this time studying, Fusha, and then like, that's not really how people speak, right? So then people can understand what you're saying, but you don't really understand what they're saying. So I mean, that's the difficulty with Arabic. But I think that sometimes people overrate the difficulty of Arabic, in the sense that I think that the alphabet of Arabic, or like reading Arabic, is one of the most logical, and like every letter has a sound, and it always has that sound. Like in English, we have these absurd words where you have like, all these different, exactly. Like you have all these where there's like tons of just letters in there, like that, like you say through with like, GH at the end or whatever, this sort of thing. Like it doesn't make any sense. Right. So whereas, in Arabic, like the letters, I think very consistently have the sound that they have. And then also, it is an alphabet. That's why obviously, languages like Chinese, where you don't have an alphabet, you have to learn every character individually. That's a much more difficult. So I think that the reason Arabic is difficult ultimately is the dialects,
Yeah.
But the language itself, if it was the case that all the Arabs spoke one Arabic, then it would be, I think, much easier. But that's not.
I would agree. You said earlier that you traveled to Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
How was that?
It was awesome. I mean, I think my favorite thing about it, of course, and this is just because of Islam, is hearing the Adhan all the time.
Yeah,
because here, like I'd never heard the Adhan, in the street like that before. So that was really nice to hear for the first time, and then to hear it consistently. And also one of the things that's so beautiful is that, well, first of all, the people in Jordan, extremely friendly, extremely hospitable. My parents came to visit me actually, and they were blown away by how kind people were. You're like walking down the street and people will be like, see you and just go over to be like, welcome to Jordan,
Wow.
Like just extremely nice. And, well, what I really appreciated is that you'll be in a grocery store, and in the window of the grocery store, it's like prayers upon the Prophet, like the signs in the window, or like on a taxi cab, there's just dhikr, like there's like this. It's just the society is filled with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's something that I've never seen before. I've been to a lot of different countries, and they had their religious traditions, but their religious traditions weren't so ensconced in the culture in the way that they were when I was there. And I suspect that that's the case for a lot of Islamic countries.
How long did you stay in Jordan for?
It was about 2 months.
2 months? And why were you there?
It was to study Arabic.
Study Arabic?
There's an institute called Qasid, which is really good, where I was studying Arabic, yeah.
And how would you compare the Arabic that you got in uni to what you got in Jordan?
I'd say it was very comparable. I mean, they even used some of the same textbooks. But I kind of went, when I was at Qasid, I kind of went, well, what I really want to do is read the Quran. So I kind of went into the classical Arabic, where you're looking more at the Arabic of the Quran and the Sunnah, which, is not as helpful, I guess, with daily conversation. But for my purposes, being interested in the religion, being able to cite the Quran and understand at least some of it is a blessing.
And what do you know in Arabic? Like, I know you learned it in uni and in Jordan as well, but say something in Arabic. I don't know what.
What do you want to know? No. I can't. It's an imtihan. It's an exam. I didn't sign up for examinations.
But yeah, having Arabic friends and American friends, I'd say it's like you're switching between two cultures, two different worlds. How is that like?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance sometimes, but I think it's fine. Usually I love, there's things about American culture that I love, and there's things about Islam that I love, and I try and balance them,
Balance them out. Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of moving into a new topic now.
Okay.
So we spoke about Islam. We spoke about you learning Arabic, and there's a new topic that I want to introduce, which is something that is very, very interesting. You grew up as a vegan.
Okay, yeah.
Through your entire life.
I grew up as a vegetarian.
Sorry, vegetarian.
Yeah.
I get confused between the two.
No worries.
Yeah, so like vegetarian is you.
So vegetarian is you don't eat meat.
Yeah.
That's it, right? But you can eat dairy or whatever. So my mom is very, and compassionate, extremely compassionate person. And so this is an issue that matters a lot to her with the treatment of animals. And so my brother and I, we were both raised vegetarian. And then I've become vegan, sort of around the time that I converted to Islam. But I mean, we were kind of talking about this before, but
yeah,
so some people who are vegan, it's like they have a almost a religious belief, about the immorality of eating animals or whatever. Obviously, like that's totally incompatible with Islam.
Mm-hmm.
Islam is a religion that permits the eating of meat, and that's fine. And I don't have any, qualms about eating meat or about eating dairy in itself. My issue is that we, generally speaking, when you go to the store or you go to a restaurant, even if in my opinion, Allahu A'lam, even if it says halal because they slaughter it in the halal way, there's a lot of cruelty to the animals. And the thing is, like, to me, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was so compassionate to animals that he would say, you can't even show the knife that you're going to slaughter the animal with.
Yeah.
Right. And that is an extreme level of trying to be compassionate to the animal. You don't even want to give it fear, and a lot of these like factory farms and these places where they have animals, they don't treat the animals in the sunnah way. So that's my kind of feeling about it. But it's not any kind of belief that eating meat or dairy or anything is wrong. It's just that cruelty to the animals is wrong.
So when it comes to halal food, like even if you see a piece of meat and they put a halal sign over or something like that, so you're saying that in a sense you have doubt towards it because you're not 100% sure since you're not the one that's slaughtering the animal?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can say halal, meaning you cut the throat and you drain the blood.
Yeah.
But did you treat it in the sunnah way?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Did you treat it with the compassion that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said a person should treat even all living things with? And so if I, it's a different story. Maybe if I'm, if I'm visiting, like I have friends who have chickens, and I know how they treat them or whatever. So maybe if I'm with them, it's a different thing. Maybe I'll eat the eggs or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But just as a general rule, if I go to restaurants, if I go to grocery store, I think it's better to avoid it just in case, because it's really horrible that some of the things they do to the animals. And I think it's contrary to Islam.
Yeah, some of the industry practices are very scary if you go and search on it. But would you eat like meat or chicken if you were the one that was slaughtering it?
Yeah.
You would?
Yeah, the only thing about it is that since I was raised without eating meat, I don't know how my stomach would handle it, but I would be willing to do so. Like, I don't have any moral qualm about, or if I knew someone and I trusted them to be, kind to the animal,
The question, there was a question I asked you before we started the podcast, which was, what age did you start being a vegetarian? And you said all your life.
Yeah.
Like for me personally, a person who's 5-6 years old probably wants milk chocolate with extra whipped cream on
Well,
the top.
I was vegetarian, so I could have. I did.
Oh.
I had milk chocolate with whipped cream. Well, I don't know exactly that, but yeah. I mean, so I did. You know, we had ice cream or whatever. You know, it wasn't. And actually, the reason that we ultimately went vegan is because, well, then you look into the way that dairy cows are treated and all those sorts of things, and it's also pretty brutal. So that's why, you know, we also did that later on. But yeah, like ever since I was a kid, you know, I didn't eat meat when I was a child. I'd been vegetarian since I was.
Must be hard giving up pizza, man. I love.
Well, yeah,
pizza,
giving up pizza was difficult.
But I can't go 2 weeks without having
you know what
pizza.
though? I guess it depends on your taste, right? But I love Indian food and I love Thai food.
Absolutely.
And so there's lots of vegan options in those cuisines, you know, whereas if you are eating Italian food, you know, there's lots of cheese or things like that. It's a little more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's like if you have a very expansive palate and you like lots of different foods, it's easier. But if you're a person who's like, you know, I don't like spicy food or whatever, then it's going to be pretty hard. You're going to be eating like vegetables, you know. I don't, you know, or you eat the, you know, the fake meats they have in the store.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about those is, okay, yes, you're trying to be healthier, or sorry, you're trying to be good to the animals, but those are not really healthier. You know, like if people are trying to be vegan for health reasons, which is a different conversation.
Yeah.
I think people sometimes have the false impression that because something's vegan, it's healthier, and that is not true, right? A lot of those things like vegan cheeses and whatever are not healthier for you, you know, in terms of just fat content and all that stuff. No, not what. Yeah, I don't eat fish. Again, like I said, obviously it's different contexts. Maybe if someone has caught the fish or whatever, but there's also a lot. You can go on to the details of these industries and how they, you know. Yeah, honey. I feel more comfortable about honey than I would. Obviously, that's like a controversial topic. Like, I feel like vegans are gonna be outraged at me in the comment. Well, they're already outraged probably just because I was like, I don't think there's anything wrong with eating meat, right? Which is what you know. That's like vegans really are what they believe. I'm just saying I think there's something wrong with the cruelty, right? And I don't want to be supporting that with my money. You know, I don't want to be spending my money in a way that might be offensive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is a very noble purpose, to be honest. But growing up vegan, so vegetarian. Sorry, I'm sorry. Vegetarian.
That's right.
Yeah, growing up vegetarian, all of us kind of, in a sense, grow up with the beliefs that our parents instilled in us. Until we reach a level of maturity where we're able to choose the beliefs that we want for ourselves and that we don't want. So, when did you become a vegan or vegan of your own choice?
I always say, so with being a vegetarian, since I was raised that way, I'm not sure when I would say I was like, this is something I truly believe. But I think it would have been when I was like 13 or 14, you know. But I became vegan totally my own choice. That was like when I was 17.
Yeah.
Again, around the time when I became Muslim.
And did you find any like hardships or challenges in relationships? Let's say, for example, if you want to go out to a specific restaurant, oh no, because Zach is vegetarian, for example.
I mean, sometimes, but I think that fortunately in the United States, there's a lot of options, and usually you go somewhere and there's something I can eat. You know, I try not to be annoying about it as best I can. You know.
Yeah, not many people understand, I guess, the vegan and vegetarian diet. Because, like, I'd say there are a lot of maybe misconceptions surrounding it, saying that it's not good for your health and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, well, it obviously depends. Like, I think in the U.S., people are extremely lenient. Or, you know, I've never really had a problem with it. Other places that I visited, you know, if I've gone to other countries, sometimes it can be hard. Not because people aren't understanding, but just hard to find something, you know, like to eat. But you can do it. You know, it's not. I think people exaggerate. It's like with Islam. Like it seems like, oh, you know, you can't drink alcohol, you can't do all these things. But once you get in the habit of doing those things, it's much easier than I think people think.
How old are you right now?
20. Well, actually, I'm 22. I turn 23 very soon.
Okay, you're gonna turn 23.
Yeah.
So for almost, or if not, for all 23 years of your life, you were a vegan and or vegetarian.
Yes.
Come on, man. You must have cheated. Come on.
When I was like in sixth grade, I had a friend of mine who was like, "Bro, you have to try this this turkey or whatever." So I ate like a crumb. I wouldn't have even. It was like, what was even the point of it? Because you couldn't have even tasted it. It's like a, you know. But I was like, okay, bro. I gave it in the peer pressure.
You gave it to peer pressure. I don't know. For me personally, like, I love me some steak. Yeah, I can't go a long time without having steak or something like that. But let's say, for example, you're in a situation where you don't have access to vegetarian food. Let's say, for example, you're traveling or something like that, and you don't have that access. Were you ever in a situation like that?
I don't think that I was ever in a situation where I didn't have any. There's definitely situations where I didn't have any vegetarian options that I genuinely wanted to eat, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But usually there's like salad or something, and that's like, you know, I'm not like, oh, I'm very enthusiastic about eating this lettuce or whatever. But that's like, you know, I would eat it if that's all I had. I don't think I've ever been in a case where I was like, I'm gonna go hungry if I don't eat this, you know. There's usually something, like even like in Jordan, you know, sometimes it's difficult to eat vegetarian, but then, you know, I just ate rice and beans, you know.
So you were in Jordan for 2-3 months, and since we're on the topic of food, did you have the kanafa? Go on.
Well, I did. I have to say, astaghfirullah.
You cheated again,
Suleiman. This is on the veganism. This is Suleiman was like, bro, if you go to the Middle East, you have to try kanafa at least once. So I was like, okay, brother, I'll try it at least once, and that was a good decision, I think.
You like it?
Kanafa is really good. Yeah.
Would you do it again?
No.
You would
unless I knew the cheese was, you know, was treated well. And really, I shouldn't have. But I was like, bro, I was looking at kanafa. It's at Habiba in Jordan. You know, it's like, bro.
No, anything else that you tried besides the kanafa? Like basbousa, you know?
No, I've made basbousa myself, a vegan version.
How?
I was like, oh, this looks delicious. So I found a vegan recipe online. And I found a vegan kanafa recipe recently, which I'm not sure how it'll be, but I'm going to try and make it for Eid, I think.
For Eid?
Yeah.
Oh,
we'll see how it goes.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's going to compare to the actual...
Well, you guys, maybe I could... If I see you guys again, you can try it maybe, and you can.
Okay, we'll
see how it goes. I'm sure it won't be as good as kanafa from Habiba, but hopefully it'll be at least decent, you know. But the basbousa was amazing. It was really good.
I love basbousa. I think I love basbousa more than kanafa. I don't know. Some people may come at me for that. But you said like the most rewarding aspects of being vegetarian was following the sunnah, basically.
Yeah, I think that because I think, look, you know, that's the rahmah, you know, and that's an attribute of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I think it's good to try and imitate it as best. Obviously, you know, everybody in every attribute of every virtue, sabr or whatever it is, we fall short, you know, at times, but that's the goal, is to try and imitate those things.
Mm-hmm. I mean, right now we're in the month of Ramadan, and for us especially, like, we love to have like buffets, big dishes, all types of food, dessert, and that type of stuff. Being a vegan during Ramadan, how is that?
I mean, I'm just eating the same way as usual, really. You know, I have Indian food, you know, Indian type foods or whatever. It's not. I wouldn't say. I mean, I guess I you know, the other thing too is that I think a lot of Muslims who are born Muslim, they have an expectation of what the feasts of Ramadan are going to be like. Yeah, but I never had that. You know, my first Ramadans were by myself, just eating food that my parents would make anyways. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't really change in that way.
And when it comes to, let's say, for example, you're in a situation where you accidentally ordered something that had cheese in it or something that wouldn't be a part of your vegan diet. What would you react in that sense? Would you like?
I mean, it depends on the circumstance. Usually, I would try and not have it, mm-hmm. Unless it's like really a major inconvenience. But I try and avoid it if I could.
So we touched on several topics so far. We touched on your background, you becoming Muslim, learning Arabic, veganism, and there are just a couple more questions that I really want you to take your time answering.
Mhm.
So what would you say to people who would divide between the three major religions? Obviously, you grew up in a household where there was Christianity and Judaism, and then you yourself became Muslim.
Mhm.
What would you say to those who would focus on the differences more than anything, I'd say?
Like those who are more focused on what divides the religions than brings them together?
Exactly.
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, I think I honestly, obviously, ultimately I left Judaism, or I never really was that Jewish, but I think the way that the rabbi had put it, that memory that I have, was really lovely. This idea that, look, these scriptures are brothers in a sense. And, there are differences, and those are important, and you don't want to downplay those. But at the same time, I think there's lots of cultural trends going on in the world right now, which are anti-religious, anti-traditional values. And I think it would be a good thing if members of the traditional, Abrahamic religions united a little bit more than we are against those trends, because, secularization and all those things, that's coming for all of us, Christian, Muslim, whatever. And I think we're better off working together against that than being divided like we often are.
Would you ever consider moving to a Muslim country or a Muslim state?
I definitely would consider it for sure. I don't know. I don't have any plan at it now, but I loved Jordan. I loved being there. I unfortunately don't have as much of an experience in so many Muslim countries as I want to. Hopefully, I'll visit more places and see how I like them.
But
the only thing is, and this isn't. Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say is that I want my grandchildren to be able to have a relationship with my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I lived in some other country, it'd be very difficult because. Well, we don't go too deep into this, but there's a lot of drama on my family or whatever, and I don't want that to be the case. I want my parents, to have a relationship with their grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really important.
So you still want to maintain the familial relationships.
Exactly.
So any Arab countries you would go to specifically, like maybe besides Jordan,
to visit? Oh yeah, well I want to go to basically all of them almost. I want to go to Egypt, Morocco, Saudi, Kuwait. Honestly, I would go to any one of them. Like really, I mean, because I think that they all have something interesting, and but especially probably, I mean, really the country that I don't know if this goes into a whole other topic, but where I had wanted to go for a really long time, and alhamdulillah, I'm glad that I was able to go to, is Palestine. So when I was in Jordan, I did go to Jerusalem and the West Bank and stuff like that. And that was a blessing to be able to have gone there because I'm sure I've never been to Mecca. I'm sure people have this experience there of Mecca, but the holiness is there. You feel it. Even with all the chaos of the conflict and the occupation, when you're in Al-Aqsa, it's like it's not there. Like you feel the peace,
Wow. That's really beautiful. I guess one of my destinations to go to is Al-Aqsa Mosque, is to Palestine.
Inshallah.
So hopefully all of us get to go there one day. But would you, just staying on this topic for a second, would you raise your kids in the U.S. or would you raise them in a different country, let's say a Muslim country?
I would have no problem raising my kids here. I think I do like the United States, and I think there's good Muslim communities in the United States. And like I said, I want them to have a relationship with their family. I wouldn't be against raising them somewhere else too. I just think that it would make it hard for, I think again, this is the sunnah, it's important to maintain family relations and to honor your parents.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
And I think it's always a shame when grandparents don't get to see their grandchildren or their children. And I think that's one thing that's a shame, especially in the United States. I think Muslim countries do this a lot better. Families are so divided, not just geographically, but politically personally, people not speaking to one another, people on other sides of the country, people hating one another because this person's a Trump fan and this person's a Democrat. And that's just a shame. Family should come before all those things,
Mm-hmm. And would you raise them as Muslim as well, or would
Oh,
you
absolutely.
give them the freedom to research and
Well,
as your parents did for you?
Yeah, I'm very grateful that my parents gave me that freedom. So I certainly would want to. I would want it to be the case that they were Muslim because they thought about this and they decided that they believed it too. I wouldn't want it just to be like they're just mindless, regurgitators of what I've told them. But certainly, I'm going to want to teach them Islam, raise them, in a Muslim household. Inshallah, hopefully having a Muslim wife, and that's teaching them Islam. But I do think it's important to let them think critically for themselves, especially because it's like, look, that's the whole spirit, I think, of La ikraha fid din, because the verse that comes after that is, truth has become distinct from error. And I think that the point of that is that, look, if something's true, you should be able to demonstrate that it's true. You don't need force. And so I think that it's important to raise kids in a Muslim household and Muslim context because the pressure of secular culture is strong. But I also think that, you want them to believe because they believe.
Absolutely. See, the reason why I asked this question is because the major way kids are influenced is through their environment. Yes, they go to school, which is their major source of influence, but they're also going to be back home. So trying to balance between the things that they hear in the outside world, all of the, I'd say, liberal ideologies, and then coming back to a conservative and traditional household. So that was the reason why I asked that question, like raising them in a Muslim country, but also you want to keep the familial relationships. So, but because you're such a well-educated person, would you homeschool your kids or let them in public schools or private schools?
That's a really good question. I don't know what my plan will be ultimately. I honestly, I'm not. I think homeschooling can have some good attributes to it, but I'm not sure. Honestly, I'd have to think about it. I don't have a definitive perspective on it now.
What would your message be to people who believe the misconceptions of Islam?
My message would be, well, firstly, I guess it depends on from which angle they're coming from. Because if they're like, there's all the time you get conservative Christians who have, Islam is violent or whatever. And what I would say to them is, like, first of all, look at your own book. You look at your own Old Testament, because the stuff that's in that is, and I don't believe that's ultimately from God, is so much worse than anything you'll find in the Islamic tradition. And then I would say, look, if you have to, I think the problem is so many people, they go into it with a conclusion set before they begin, right? They want to research so they can say that Islam is bad, right? Or they want to research so they can say it's good. And I think you have to just be like, look, I'm one person out of billions. The probability that my beliefs are correct about everything are really low. So you have to have an open mind and go into everything with, like, maybe this is something to tell me that I'm not seeing. And I think if you go into that and you're like, look, I'm just going to study all this. This is how I felt, or how I wanted to do things, is I'm just going to try and study all the religions and as best I can decide on the one that I think is best. And I think that if more people had that open mind and they really studied, I think that they would overcome a lot of the misconceptions.
If there is one thing you want listeners to know about Islam, what would it be?
One thing. Well, let me ask you. Can I ask you a question, or is that against
Go
the
ahead.
rules?
No, go ahead.
It's like, what would you say?
For me, I would look into my own reasons for why, after reaching the level of maturity, how I rationalized why being a Muslim is the way for me. I would give my own reasons for that. And if I wanted to entice someone to learn more about Islam, I would state that specific reason or something like that. So for you, what would that reason be?
So, yeah, I mean, there's a number of different ones, but I think ultimately, I think that you cannot go and read verses from the Quran, like especially I think that there's a beautiful, or the question was, if there's one thing that you want them to take away from Islam, what would be, or tell them about Islam?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so one thing I think is, and this is, I guess, that's a whole nother discussion, but there's this idea in Islam, especially in Surah Al-Fajr and Surah Al-Balad, talking about this social obligation of people towards the orphans or towards the poor, towards the freeing of slaves. And I think that message is really crucial. I think that's something people don't maybe know about Islam. And especially, I love the passage in Surah Al-Balad where it's talking about, like, look, in a sense, the way to be saved, or the way to Jannah, is the difficult pass. It's kind of difficult to translate this verse, but and what that involves is the freeing of slaves and the feeding of the poor and so forth. And so I think really that's like, look, Islam is about service for other people and making the world a more beautiful place. And I think that Islam is the most just religion in terms of its teaching about the concept of justice, because you find in the Old Testament this idea, of collective punishment, or collective justice, where some members of a particular group have done X, and now the whole group for all eternity is to be punished, like the Amalekites, for example. Yeah. And then, in the New Testament, I think this is more dubious, but of course, in Christian doctrine itself, there's the concept of original sin, right? Or this idea that everyone is condemned for the sins of their first parents, right? Whereas in Islam, everything is about individual justice. There's this idea of, God, repeatedly the Quran says, look, God did not wrong them, they wrong themselves, right? Or no bearer of burdens will bear the burden of another, right? These are things that are repeated multiple times throughout the Quran. And I think that's a concept so ahead of its time, because so many cultures in history, you just, there's a that's ethnic cleansing, or you attack the whole group, everything, rather than saying, look, no, only the one who's committed the crime is guilty, and that's an idea that you have inklings of it, obviously, or statements of it in the biblical context, but it's very conflicted or contradictory, whereas in the Quran it's clear. And then I would say that I guess in terms of the reason for Islam, like we were talking about before, that well, there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but what I would say is that, well, actually, I don't know. Maybe that's too much of at the end.
No, go ahead. No, take your time. Take your time. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to like go on a huge rant, but basically, one thing I would say is, look, there's it has to do with, the fact that you find in the Old Testament these prophecies about how one day the God of Abraham will be worshipped to the ends of the earth. And that's a statement that's being written down. Even if you're taking the most skeptical historian perspective on the Old Testament, and you're saying, this is coming from, like the Babylonian exile period, or maybe even when the Greeks were ruling the Levant area. It is a remarkable thing to have so many statements about how of prophecy, of saying that one day the God of Abraham will be worshipped across the entire world. Mm-hmm. And you get, for example, in Genesis, you get this statement to God telling Abraham, alayhi salam, or Ibrahim, that through your descendants, all the nations of the world will be blessed. And that's a statement that even, whether you think, however you date the Torah, even at the most skeptical dating, is long before the God of Abraham was known anywhere outside of this little, group of people, Bani Israel. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that you then have, now we look back and we say, it's incredible. Like, look, actually the God of Abraham is worshipped everywhere. And not only that, you think about the enemies of the people that God had chosen, right? Bani Israel and the prophets that he had sent to them, like the Babylonians or the Persians or the Egyptians and all these groups that you talk about in the Quran or the Old Testament as persecuting them, are who worships their gods today, right? Who worships the gods of Egypt today, or the gods of Assyria, or Babylon? Yeah, no. In every one of those places, that's Iraq, right? That's Syria, that's Egypt. In every one of those places, people bow their heads 5 times a day to the God of Abraham, right? He's conquered all of those people just as he had said he would. And I think that's a really powerful thing. And people might argue whether I think that's at least a testimony to the Abrahamic religions, whether you go Christianity or Islam. But I think Islam, obviously, for reasons we talked about before, with the Unitarian perspective on Jesus. But it's a prophecy that clearly came true in a way that's unprecedented, I think, in any other religious tradition.
Wow, what a beautiful answer, to be honest.
Wallahu alam.
Zach, thank you so much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. It's been an honor. I've learned so much from you. And if you want to say anything in Arabic to the listeners, you could go ahead. Just say anything you want.
أحب فيروز.
Thank you very much. Thank you.